In the quiet town of Oklahoma, March 2009 became a month forever etched in infamy when the bodies of 35-year-old Clara Donovan and 37-year-old Daniel Harper were discovered in a horrific tableau. Hidden beneath a freshly poured slab of concrete at a local construction site, their lives had ended in a manner that would shock the community. This was not a simple case of disappearance, but the beginning of uncovering a sinister plot. On the evening of March 6, 2009, Clara Donovan's sister sat in a local diner, her untouched coffee growing cold. Clara, known for her reliability, had never missed their weekly lunch without a heads up. Her absence was alarming enough for her sister to start calling her repeatedly, only to be met with voicemail. By evening, with no response, her sister decided to report Clara missing to the police, detailing her sister's punctual nature and the unusual silence. Simultaneously, in another part of town, Daniel Harper's wife was growing increasingly anxious as the daylight waned. Daniel had mentioned a quick errand with a friend earlier in the day. His absence, combined with his phone going straight to voicemail and his office confirming he hadn't shown up for work, led her to contact the police. She described Daniel as a man who kept his word, making his disappearance all the more perplexing and terrifying. In the serene backdrop of an Oklahoma suburb, Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper lived lives that many would envy. Clara, at 35, was the quintessence of warmth and dedication, her role as an elementary school teacher not just a job but a calling. She was adored by students for her empathy and by colleagues for her professionalism. Her marriage to James Donovan, a contractor whose meticulous nature had built not just homes but a reputation for excellence, appeared to be a union of stability and love. Together, they had crafted a life that seemed almost too perfect, with Clara often hosting community events, her house filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. Daniel Harper, at 37, was the charismatic counterpoint to the reserved James. His career in real estate was marked by success, his charm and social acumen making him a beloved figure among clients and friends alike. His friendship with James went back to college, a bond that included shared business ventures and countless social gatherings. However, this picture of perfection was marred by hidden truths. Beneath the surface, Clara and Daniel's relationship had evolved into something more than friendship, an affair that would eventually shatter the trust and the lives of all involved. In the quaint sunlit diner where Clara Donovan and her sister had shared countless lunches, an unusual quietness prevailed on March 6, 2009. Clara's sister, a woman accustomed to the rhythm of their routine, sat with an untouched cup of coffee, her eyes occasionally darting to the door. Clara was never late, especially not without a call or text to explain her delay. Her sister's initial concern was mild. Perhaps Clara was caught up with work or had encountered some traffic, but as minutes turned to hours and her calls went unanswered, that concern morphed into genuine alarm. Clara's phone, typically a lifeline of communication, was now a silent testament to her absence. By evening, her sister's anxiety had reached a crescendo, compelling her to report Clara missing to the police, her voice laced with a fear she hadn't known she could feel. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Harper's wife was experiencing her own version of this nightmare. Daniel, known for his punctuality and reliability, had left the house for what he described as a quick errand with a friend. However, as the afternoon wore into evening, his absence became more than just a delay. It was an anomaly in his otherwise predictable life. His wife, trying to quell her rising panic, called his phone multiple times, only to be met with the automated voice of his voicemail. Her attempts to reach him through his office confirmed her worst fears. Daniel hadn't been seen there all day. The house, usually filled with his laughter and the occasional clatter of him working, now echoed with silence. Her distress led her to the police station, where she reported him missing, her words painting a picture of a man who always kept his promises, now inexplicably gone. Upon receiving the reports of Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper's disappearances, the Oklahoma Police Department kicked off what would become one of their most intensive searches in recent memory. The initial steps involved interviewing those closest to Clara and Daniel, family, friends, and co-workers, to gather any possible leads. Police officers conducted door-to-door inquiries in neighborhoods where Clara and Daniel were known to frequent, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. The police also began a thorough examination of Clara and Daniel's digital footprints, checking phone records, emails, and social media for any signs of distress or plans involving the other. Flyers with their photos were distributed and local media were engaged to spread the word, hoping that public assistance might yield clues. Patrol cars with extra shifts were assigned to sweep areas where they might have last been seen, particularly around Clara's school and Daniel's office. The community, still in the dark about the connection between the two cases, rallied with offers of help. Volunteers organized search parties, scouring local parks, streets, and any place Clara or Daniel might have gone. The atmosphere in the town was one of collective concern, with everyone from neighbors to strangers hoping for a safe return of the missing individuals. As the separate investigations continued, a crucial piece of information emerged that linked Clara and Daniel's cases. Both had been seen near the same construction site managed by James Donovan, Clara's husband. This wasn't merely a coincidence, it was a significant lead. Police began to suspect that these disappearances might not be unrelated events but part of a sinister narrative. Detectives started to compile a timeline, noting that both Clara and Daniel had last been seen around the construction site on March 3rd. This connection shifted the investigation from two missing persons cases to a potential murder inquiry. The police now had a focal point for their search, and the depth of their investigation intensified, looking into James Donovan's background, his relationships with both victims, and any possible motive. The investigation into the disappearances of Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper took a definitive turn when it became clear that the construction site managed by James Donovan was the last place they were seen alive. The site, located in a burgeoning Oklahoma suburb, was a large area where new homes were being built, symbolizing growth but soon to be marked by tragedy. Witnesses had seen Clara's car parked near the site on March 3rd, an unusual occurrence given her typical routine. This sighting was corroborated by security footage from a nearby gas station, showing her vehicle driving towards the construction area. Similarly, several workers recalled seeing Daniel Harper at the site, speaking with James Donovan. The police began to focus their efforts here, canvassing the area, talking to more workers, and securing any available video evidence from surrounding businesses. The site became more than just a location for building homes. It was now a potential crime scene where the last chapter of Clara and Daniel's lives might have been written. Interviews with the construction workers provided pivotal clues. One worker remembered the interaction between James and Daniel seemed unusually tense, a detail that was initially overlooked but now held significant weight. Another worker spoke of Clara's presence, her car parked in an area not typically used by visitors or employees, suggesting she wasn't there on routine business. Additionally, physical evidence was starting to emerge. A discarded coffee cup, potentially belonging to one of the victims or James, was found near where Clara's car had been parked. Fibers from clothing were collected from the area, and the police began to match these against known items belonging to Clara and Daniel. The site was meticulously combed for any other signs of struggle or evidence of violence, with every piece of potential evidence bagged and tagged for analysis. The investigation into Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper's disappearance took a chilling turn when workers at James Donovan's construction site recounted an unusual event. A concrete pour scheduled for days later had been completed on the night of March 4, 2009, under James's direct supervision. Concrete work was a precise process, planned meticulously for structural integrity and curing times, making this premature pour highly suspicious. James had explained it as an effort to stay ahead of schedule, but his insistence on working alone, the late hour, and the workers' observations of his demeanor suggested something more was at play. This anomaly didn't just raise eyebrows, it set off alarm bells. The police, sensing that this might be more than just an overzealous work ethic, decided to investigate what lay beneath the newly poured concrete. They employed ground-penetrating radar to scan the area, looking for any anomalies that could indicate something or someone had been buried there. The radar indeed showed signs of irregular shapes beneath the surface, confirming the need for a physical excavation. With the radar results in hand, a team of forensic experts and law enforcement officers began the somber task of digging into the concrete. The process was meticulous, each piece of concrete removed with care to preserve any evidence that might be trapped beneath. As they worked, the air filled with a mix of dust and the sharp scent of cement, but soon a more sinister odor emerged, the unmistakable smell of decomposition. The excavation revealed two bodies, one male and one female, lying in positions that suggested they had been hastily buried. The sight was horrifying, transforming the construction site from a place of creation to one of concealment. The bodies were covered in concrete, their features obscured but still recognizable enough to confirm human remains. The area was immediately secured as a crime scene, with forensic teams documenting every detail, from the bodies' positions to the surrounding environment, ensuring that all evidence was preserved for analysis. The process of uncovering the bodies beneath the concrete at the construction site was not merely an act of excavation, but a meticulous forensic investigation aimed at revealing the truth behind the disappearance of Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper. Each piece of concrete was removed with precision, documenting the layers, the tools used, and any signs of disturbance in the soil beneath. Crime scene investigators, equipped with cameras, evidence markers, and forensic tools, worked in tandem with archaeologists to ensure that every piece of evidence was preserved. They noted the positioning of the bodies, how they were placed, any signs of struggle, and items like clothing or personal effects that might have been buried with them. The scene was photographed from multiple angles, with detailed notes taken on each finding. The concrete itself was examined for any tool marks that could match implements found at the site or those owned by James Donovan. This careful unearthing wasn't just about finding the bodies, but also about reconstructing the last moments of their lives, piecing together how the crime was executed, and understanding the mindset of the killer. As the concrete was removed, the reality of the situation became starkly clear. This was not a crime committed in a moment of passion, but one that was planned, with the construction site used as both the stage for murder and the means of concealment. The identification of the bodies was a somber, painstaking process, conducted with both urgency and respect for the deceased. Dental records were the primary method used, as teeth are often the most enduring part of human remains. Clara Donovan was identified through her unique dental fillings and a bracelet she consistently wore, both of which had been noted previously by family members. Daniel Harper was recognized by his dental records and a distinctive tattoo on his arm, along with a watch he was known for wearing. The confirmation of their identities brought a wave of grief and closure to their families. Clara's sister, who had initiated the missing person report, and Daniel's wife, who had waited in vain for his return, now faced the harsh reality of their loss. This process was more than just matching records. It was about giving names back to the bodies, acknowledging their lives, and beginning the journey towards justice for the victims. The identification was a moment of finality, marking the transition from hope to mourning, from uncertainty to the grim certainty of death. The forensic examination of Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper's bodies was pivotal in reconstructing the narrative of their last moments and understanding the method and intensity of the attack. Clara's autopsy revealed significant bruising around her neck, clear signs of strangulation. This method of murder suggested a personal connection, an act carried out by someone she knew, possibly in an intimate setting, reflecting rage or betrayal. The marks on her neck were consistent with manual strangulation, indicating that the perpetrator was likely known to her, close enough to subdue her without immediate struggle. Daniel's examination showed he had suffered from severe blunt force trauma to the skull. The nature of his injuries suggested he was struck with a heavy, possibly construction-related tool like a hammer or crowbar, which would have been readily available at the site. The trauma was so severe that it likely caused immediate incapacitation or death, indicating a violent confrontation. Beyond the immediate causes of death, forensic experts looked for trace evidence. Fibers from clothing, hair, possible blood spatter, and soil samples were collected from around the burial site and the victims' bodies. Any DNA found on or near the victims could link back to James Donovan, providing direct evidence of his involvement. The analysis also included examining any tools found at the site for matching tool marks to those on the victims, further connecting the crime to James's professional environment. With the bodies discovered at his construction site, James Donovan quickly became the central figure in the investigation. His relationships with the victims were not just circumstantial, they provided a clear motive. Clara was his wife, and Daniel was his best friend, a combination that painted a picture of personal betrayal. His calm, almost detached demeanor during initial police questioning was noted, contrasting sharply with the gravity of the crime. Investigators dove deep into James's personal and professional life, interviewing colleagues, friends, and family to understand his character, any past behavior that might hint at violence or instability, and his recent interactions with Clara and Daniel. They looked into his financials, any changes in behavior or routine around the time of the disappearance, and his alibi for the night in question, which seemed to have gaps or inconsistencies. His knowledge of construction, particularly how to use concrete to hide something, made him a suspect of particular interest. His access to the site, his control over the work schedule, and his ability to work alone or with minimal supervision provided him with both the means and the opportunity to commit these murders. The case against James Donovan was built on a wealth of evidence, both physical and circumstantial, that painted a detailed picture of his involvement in the murders of Clara Donovan and Daniel Harper. Starting with the physical evidence, Clara's wedding ring was found partially embedded in the concrete where the bodies were discovered, a stark symbol of the crime and a direct link to James. Receipts for concrete mix, dated the night of the murders, traced back to purchases James had made, suggesting he had the materials ready for his gruesome task. GPS data from his truck placed him at the construction site late that night, contradicting his alibi and confirming his presence at the scene of the crime. Forensic teams also collected potential DNA or fingerprints from tools at the site, particularly those that could have been used in the assault on Daniel, like a hammer or crowbar. The analysis of these items could provide a direct link to James, given his access to and familiarity with these tools. Fibers from clothing, hair, or any blood found at the scene were meticulously examined, hoping to match them back to James or the victims. Circumstantial evidence was equally damning. James's behavior during police questioning was noted for its evasiveness and lack of emotional response, which seemed incongruent with the gravity of the situation. His alibi was inconsistent, with gaps that aligned suspiciously with the timeline of the crime. Witnesses from the construction site provided accounts of seeing him working alone late at night on the day the concrete was poured, an action that now took on sinister implications. The combination of all these elements, from the physical remnants of the crime scene to the behavioral and circumstantial clues, built a case that suggested not just involvement but premeditation, execution, and an attempt at concealment by James Donovan. James Donovan's arrest on March 20, 2009 was a moment that reverberated through the community, turning a local contractor into a figure of national attention. The police, after gathering substantial evidence, made the arrest at his home, which was watched by neighbors and soon by the media. The news of his arrest for the double murder of his wife and best friend was a shock, transforming public perception of James from a man of trust to one of suspicion and horror. The media coverage was intense, with every detail of the case splashed across newspapers, television, and online platforms. The public's reaction was a blend of several emotions: disbelief at the transformation of someone they knew into a suspected murderer, sorrow for the victims and their families, and a palpable sense of betrayal. People who had once shared barbecues, business deals, or casual conversations with James now found themselves discussing the case in hushed tones, trying to reconcile the man they knew with the crimes he was accused of. This arrest didn't just mark the end of James's freedom, but also sparked a community-wide reflection on trust, betrayal, and the dark sides of human nature. The case became a topic of local lore, a cautionary tale about what lies beneath the surface of seemingly normal lives. The motive behind James Donovan's actions unfolded as one of profound betrayal. James had discovered that his wife, Clara, was having an affair with his best friend, Daniel Harper. This betrayal was not just personal. It struck at the core of his identity, his trust, and his life's foundations. The affair had been hidden, a secret that, when exposed, led to an emotional implosion for James, driving him to revenge rather than reconciliation or separation. The murders were not impulsive acts of passion, but calculated moves designed to punish those he felt had wronged him. The method of killing, strangulation for Clara, suggesting an intimate personal act of rage, and the brutal blunt force trauma inflicted on Daniel, indicating a violent confrontation, reflected a man driven by the need to exact vengeance. This narrative of betrayal was central to understanding James's psychological state, providing the prosecution with a clear motive to argue in court. When the trial of James Donovan started in September 2010, it was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle that captivated the public's attention. The courtroom was packed with media, family members of the victims, and those intrigued by the story of betrayal and murder. The prosecution presented a meticulous case detailing the timeline, the evidence gathered, and the psychological profile of a man driven by betrayal to commit murder. They painted James as someone who had used his professional knowledge to plan and execute the crime, from the method of killing to the concealment beneath concrete. On the other hand, the defense argued for temporary insanity, claiming that the emotional devastation of discovering the affair was enough to push James into a state where he was not fully responsible for his actions. They brought in psychological experts to testify about how such a betrayal could lead to a mental breakdown, suggesting that the murders were not the actions of a rational, calculating killer, but of a man overwhelmed by emotion. The trial became a battleground of narratives, with each side presenting evidence, testimonies, and expert opinions to sway the jury. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement was dissected, with the courtroom becoming a stage for the drama of human psychology, love, betrayal, and justice. After weeks of intense legal arguments, emotional testimonies, and public scrutiny, the jury returned with their verdict. In a courtroom filled with tension, James Donovan was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The decision was met with a mix of relief and sorrow, relief for those who had sought justice for Clara and Daniel, and sorrow for the lives lost and the community forever changed by this tragedy. The sentencing hearing, which followed shortly, resulted in James receiving life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, emphasized the premeditated nature of the crimes, the brutality involved, and the need for society to be protected from such calculated acts of revenge. The sentence was not just a legal conclusion, but a reflection of the community's need for closure, for justice, and for a reminder of the consequences of allowing betrayal and rage to dictate one's actions. This verdict and sentencing marked the end of a legal saga, but left a lasting impact on everyone involved, serving as a stark reminder of how love and trust can turn into hate and destruction when betrayed. The case of James Donovan would be remembered as one of the darkest tales from the small Oklahoma suburb, a story of how personal lives can unravel into public tragedy.